I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our August event, and we hope you're all doing well in lockdown. And a special welcome to all of our Iabc Queensland members. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Alicia Sutherland, and I'm the president of Iabc Queensland. And I'm delighted to be your host tonight, along with several members of our volunteer board who are also with us, including who you can see on screen, Rianne Bell, who's running Zoom for us tonight as moderator and has been our organizer extraordinaire in this event. So thanks very much, Rianne. And Rianne will also be monitoring the chat tonight. So anything that you want to add or say or need, please put it in there. So it's great to be delivering this event virtually. And it feels like the past 18 months have really helped communicators to prepare ahead and be ready to somewhat seamlessly move these opportunities online at short notice. And so too for us at Iabc Queensland. So thank you to all our board members and to Nathan for responding at short notice to the lockdown and preparing this online format. So a few housekeeping items. Tonight's session will be as interactive as you might want it to be, and we will have time for Q&A after Nathan's presentation. Please, please, please use the reactions buttons throughout and type in the chat whenever you like, sharing any questions that you have. But for clear audio, let's all stay on mute until Q&A. If you're having connection, audio, or camera difficulties, our advice, other than turning it on and off again, is try leaving the call and rejoining. This session is being recorded and we'll be providing a recording to all ticket holders as soon as possible following the event. So I hope your pizzas are warm if you've taken advantage of Nathan's special offer tonight, and the lockdown distractions are on mute as we're getting ready for some new insights from tonight's speaker who'd like to briefly introduce Nathan Schultz. So Nathan has more than 20 years of agency and in-house expertise, including with Rio Tinto, Virgin Australia and Queensland Rail. He's been a part of the award-winning communications team at Domino's Pizza since 2016, helping to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic with local and global communication, engagement and business continuity strategies. In case you didn't realize, Domino's is a top ASX listed company with foundations in our very own Brisbane since 1983, and they have 65,000 team members. We're thrilled that Nathan could join us tonight, and that Iabc Queensland is building connections and sharing diverse experiences across the comms community. So I'll now hand over to Nathan, and I'll see you all again in the Q&A. Thanks, Nathan.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Now, before I start, I guess my first question is, and I've been discussing this with others, who wants slides and who just wants to hear me speak? You'll get the same audio, but it's whether you've had enough of watching slides all day or whether you're actually keen to see some. So in the reaction button down the bottom, if you can either click on the green plus or the red X, and I'll be able to respond accordingly. I'm just going to answer a quick text message, so show me your reactions. I've got a couple of green ticks. Lots of green ticks, okay. Okay, and I'm sorry, what was I saying? Okay, so just getting a text message from the boss. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share then. There's obviously an appetite for the screen, so I'm going to put those up now. I'm sure that's only just so you can see me in a smaller box. I'm just going to show the video panel. Everybody can see the correct screen there, the big Domino's big thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to start with the fact that we often put this sort of disclaimer slide up, because the fact is, at the start of COVID-19, we said to people, look, we think this is an 18-month to 3-year thing. We don't have a crystal ball, but that's kind of how we see, based on history, how long this is going to play out. And it was surprising the number of people who were very skeptical of that. They thought, 6 months, you're one and done. And I think that's been a really interesting thing psychologically, is kind of people ticked over into 2021. I think people were very much, oh, thank God 2020 is over. Now we get back to normal. And that was never our thinking as to how we were going to get into it. What I'm going to take you through tonight is essentially how we think about communications through this period, what we call our pillars of trust, or a social license to operate, our values, which has been a really key determinant of how we've been able to navigate throughout COVID-19. And that's been, I think, a really key moment for us. And then finally, new communications formats and what's changed and what remains the same. So put your hand up if you think, or give me a thumbs up if you think that Domino's delivered pizza was really a guaranteed winner throughout COVID-19. Got one hand, I've got a couple. I can't see all of those screens. Because I think if I look at actually some of the media coverage, there's been a lot of coverage of what we call the winners. And I've got to say that we hate that idea. Not just because this idea that there are COVID winners and losers, it just seems really just gauche to us that, that somehow someone's winning out of a pandemic. But actually, and I say this because as I'm the head of investor relations at Domino's, I'm across the business strategy and the numbers. And when we actually dig down into what's happened inside of our business, that is absolutely not the case, that we consider ourselves to be a pandemic winner. In fact, and we've had a remarkable performance over the past year. But if you actually dig down into it, the reason for this exceptional performance has largely been because we've had some significant investments we acquired new countries. And what's happened is those countries just happen to come on steam at the right time for us. So countries like Germany kind of just reached a tipping point for us, France, another enormous market, and Japan reached an enormous point for us. And this idea that kind of we've been a COVID winner has actually just not been the way we think about that business, because often we're looking at this from an Australian perspective. When we go back to the beginning, it's really, I think, important and instructive to look at what's happened in Europe, because we're a business of 9 markets. Australia and New Zealand, obviously everyone knows about, and then we've got Japan, and then the rest of our business is actually in Europe. And Europe has been horrific. So if we go back to the beginning at first, we were in a situation where the French president said that we were at a war with this virus, and our stores were encouraged to close. Businesses across Europe were encouraged to close, and not least of all in France. And so we actually had conversations with some of our franchisees in France, where at the time we were legally allowed to operate. They were saying, how dare we, not just Domino's Pizza Enterprises, but how dare we as store owners in France think that we have the right to be considered okay to open, when right now I can hear flying over my house a helicopter, which is flying back and forth people from temporary hospitals that are set up in the local sporting ground. And I think it's really hard sometimes to think about from the Australian perspective when you realize that, people were dying every day, and lots of them. So we had team members who were losing members of their family. We had team members who were in intensive care. And we had certainly members of the community who were saying, how dare you operate? And so we were in a situation where our French franchisees ultimately, in consultation with us, decided that we were going to close. On the 18th of March, we closed for the first time in our history, our business in a particular market, and we closed it for 15 days. So I think it's really instructive to go back to that beginning to really kind of set up how we were thinking about our business at that point in time. Because at that moment, I was fortunate enough, I'd come off 2 weeks of holidays because I could kind of see this pandemic coming, because I knew I wasn't going to get a rest for a while. And that's the way it played out. And we were at the situation where we looked at our business and we thought, what does this actually mean if we have to close every single one of our markets for a number of months? How much cash have we got in the bank that we can continue to keep our business going? And that's a pretty stark conversation. When you realize, if you think, what if we have no income for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, as ultimately some businesses like airlines had to find out. But that's exactly the kind of tipping point that we were thinking about, and how we're going to get through this. So that really shaped the way in which we navigated throughout this pandemic. Now, I'm going to go back to me for a second. As my wife would say, my favorite topic. I started as a journalist for the Courier Mail for News Limited, and I've been fortunate enough to work for some of Australia's biggest brands. I say planes, trains, and pizzas. I worked for Virgin Australia when we had one of our aircraft. There was an attempted hijacking flying to Bali. Let me tell you, the first thing you know that one of your aircraft is being hijacked is when your phone completely melts down because the world's media starts calling you. And you start really confident, like, no, I've not heard anything like this. And then your phone keeps ringing. You realize, actually, something really bad has happened here. One of my high points, low points of my career, I don't know if people are aware of the train etiquette posters at Queensland Rail. It was a campaign to encourage people to do the right thing on trains, and we considered it super simple stuff. And I was responsible for what ultimately happened there, in which those posters became viral. Now, I can tell you that I had the most complete profanity filter known to man, and it was filthy, to stop people editing them to put their own names in. But what we didn't anticipate was people were going to take them up and graphic design them themselves to international publicity and attention. This is the most PC one that I can show. And fascinatingly, I've been asked so many times over my career, like, oh my God, you must have, like, your bosses must have been angry, or they were the happiest executives I've ever seen because finally people were talking about the message that we wanted. And the reason I raised that is because ultimately what we were talking about there was train etiquette, super simple stuff. And you'll hear that theme throughout what I'm talking about tonight, that ultimately what I'm talking about is super simple stuff. And that is heartfelt communications. When we entered into this pandemic, one of the biggest lessons for us as a business that Alicia mentioned, we've been in operations as a brand globally now for 60 years and in Australia for more than 30 years. And we always thought that if you make products that your customers like at the right price, if you obey all the laws, if you provide safe food, then that meant you had a right to operate. And then what would happen is we would outcompete with our competitors, and that's how we win. But we had a right to open our doors, and then we had a level playing field and we compete and win. And for the very first time in our history, all of these executives were facing a situation where, and I said to them quite bluntly, that we're going to head into a situation where it is a privilege and not a right to be open during this time. And that was an enormous change of mindset for us, because we suddenly realized that just doing the right thing and following all the laws was actually not enough. And I, at this stage, wrote an email to all of our global comms people, and I sent it to Domino's in the US and to our colleagues and friends who are in the UK and other countries that were in the very early stages of us dealing with this. And I said to them, and I'll quote a little bit from that email. This was March last year. I said, it's very clear to us that continuing to serve the community during COVID-19 is a privilege, not a right. And that privilege requires the trust of 5 groups. And that is team members and family members, especially parents, franchisees, customers, the community, including our suppliers, and government, who can close our business instantly if they believe we're unsafe. And our experience in France had showed us that if we lost any single one of those pillars, that Domino's would be forced to close. And I said to our colleagues that each of these groups were scared and each wondering what's going to happen to them, whether businesses like ours should even be allowed to continue during this crisis. And so to keep our social license to operate from customers, community, team members, franchisees, and government, we had to prove 2 things. The first is that Domino's played an important role in the community. And that outweighs the perceived risk of having team members who were working in our kitchens or on deliveries rather than inside their homes. And the second thing that we had to prove is that we understand the privilege of continuing to operate, and that carries a heavy responsibility to operate safely when others are closed. And that importantly, that we intended to live up to that responsibility. So our goal was in our actions. So we had to show not by words and not just say that we're safe, but we actually had to show we're safe. So we had to not just say that we're essential, but to show we're essential. And to illustrate how important this was, we went through a whipsaw reaction in New Zealand. So New Zealand, the government announced they were going to be locking down. And by the government's interpretation, by our interpretation, by our government advisors' interpretation, we had the legal right to continue to trade. but we had to shut our foyers. So we couldn't do takeaway, but we would still be allowed to do delivery. So that was the very clear interpretation that we had. So we had the legal license to operate. And what happened very, very quickly is that we went through a moment of support, and within hours, that public support was snatched away from us. The public very quickly, as I said, within hours, said, how dare you? You do not have the right to operate. You're not essential. You should be closing your doors. How dare you? And so we were on the cusp of making a decision, and internally we'd made the decision, we hadn't announced it yet, that the social license wasn't there. We no longer had the privilege to trade, and therefore we would be closing despite having that legal right. And then the government changed the laws. So we went from legally allowed, socially allowed, to legally allowed, but not socially allowed, to not socially and not legally allowed within hours. I've never seen such a change in mindset so quickly, but that's the kind of response we were living up to. But we recognized at that moment, of those 5 pillars, we lost the community, and therefore we needed to close our doors. But so to navigate throughout these next stages, we knew New Zealand was going to reopen. We knew France was going to reopen. And we suddenly realized that this was going to be a situation where markets, rather than everyone closing for 6 months, we were going to be in a situation where markets would open and close and open and close. And that's how we saw the future for us. But to maintain the best opportunity to keep open throughout this period of time, and I can tell you, in some markets, it's been very close at various times, we had to keep absolutely tight with all of those 5 pillars. Lose one, the whole business collapses for that period of time. So you lose one of those, your social license to withdraw, your privilege is taken away, and you close your doors. So how do you then show and not say with those 5 pillars of trust? Well, the short answer is there is no one size fits all. From one day to the next, we may be providing free meals to our local communities. We're reassuring parents of team members it's safe to work. We're encouraging franchisees to focus on their operations. We're updating government on our activities. I mean, as you can see on the screen here, we sent letters to parents saying that, and this is from our group CEO, he was saying, as a parent of children and teenagers who work or have worked in Domino stores, we would never do anything where we were putting team members at risk. That we had in place things like zero contact delivery, which we rolled out first in Australia, which we learned from actually our colleagues in China, who had first looked at developing something like zero contact delivery, and we stole with pride some of those techniques to put them in place in Australia. We were doing things that we had in various countries. We had various names for, between Feed the Need or Cure for the Queue, where this was one of our comms team members out delivering vouchers for pizza meals for people in the community who had just lost their jobs and were suddenly on Centrelink going and getting the first payments of JobKeeper. And the question is always with communications, how do you measure success, and are these things working? I can tell you, we went from a situation where we had franchisees in France saying, how dare we as a business, franchisees and head office, how dare we consider we have the right to open, to getting heartfelt messages and emails back from parents, writing back to the CEO saying, thank you. I appreciate you actually thinking of me. Nobody has ever thought of me as a parent of one of your team members. It's, you've got a relationship with your team member, and that kind of seems to be the end of the relationship with any other employee we've ever heard of. But you're actually bringing us into this, recognizing how important parents are. And I think it's really easy sometimes to dismiss the value of a casual job for a teenager. I say this right now, my 15-year-old is down the road working at the local Domino shop, making pizzas tonight. And I think it's really easy because he's in high school and he's, earning a bit of cash, which he's spending on parts for his guitar. And yet we know out there are 15, 16, 17-year-olds who are working in a Domino shop who are making an active contribution to their family budget. They're helping to pay the rent. They're helping to pay for groceries on the table. And so, it's really easy to say, well, they're teenagers and, let them stay home and, that's the best option. But actually, they make a meaningful contribution to themselves and to their families by being employed. And so that's what we were trying to communicate to this really important pillar, which was not only the team members, but their parents and family members as well. I mentioned before our values. It was only really 2.5 years ago that we actually sat down as a business with more than 30 years of experience. And we sat down and thought, what actually does make us as a business? What drives us? What are the things that we can help decide how to navigate throughout the challenging moral and business dilemmas that we will have over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And so we distilled down at that point our purpose and values. And they're really straightforward. our purpose is that our pizza brings people closer. And then our values sum up what we do as a business. And I'm just going to highlight just the one here. And that is that one of our values is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And that sounds really kind of airy-fairy. But what does that mean? It means that those values are central to the decision-making and discussions that we make every single day. I've put up there an example of one of our internal chats, which is an internal group of COVID planning and response group. There's 51 members you can see on the screen there. And we have, going throughout the day, live coverage of every single press conference that goes on. It's punishing. I don't know how many times I've heard Gladys Berejiklian and Dan Andrews speak over the last year, but it's a lot. And we keep that going and we update people. Now, that's not just for information purposes, but what that means is there is a separate group that's going on, a distilled group of those people at the same time who are making decisions, like, for example, today, where our communications manager is in that separate communications function. And as Daniel Andrews is speaking about the latest lockdown in Victoria, that communications team member is saying, team, are we all aligned that we should be providing counseling, free counseling to our team members and their families if they're in Victoria? So we have access to a counseling service. Should we make that available to all of our team members? And it's as simple as team members start clicking like or love on that comment, and then we go and we action that. So before that press conference is even over, we have team members essentially able to confirm that this is the reaction we're going to do. This is the practical help that we're going to provide. There are other team members in that same chat who are making the decision that we're going to activate our zero contact delivery as mandatory for all of our deliveries throughout Victoria. They can make changes to our opening times. They can make changes to our marketing strategy. All of those things can be done in virtually real time. And it's quite remarkable to see. But my point is, for this audience, is that communications is central to the planning and response. I think it's a nature of crises sometimes that people look for people who are going to make decisions. And I think it's very easy sometimes for the dominant coalition in businesses, whether that's engineers in a mining company or accountants in another firm, to think that they make all the decisions, and they typically do. But you'll often find in a crisis, people look towards communications people because they've got that values-driven approach to making decisions. And they look to communications and say, okay, right, well, what do we need to do here? And the answer to us throughout that entire time has been the ability to us to point to our values and say that the value is doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Is this the right thing to do? And it is so clarifying and so simple sometimes to make those decisions when you get to strip away questions of costs and those kind of, important questions, but just to simply distill it down to, is it the right thing to do? And it was in that decision in mind that we decided, actually in the heart of this, that we had received at the very early stages of the pandemic, we had a printing company that's in Brisbane that had suffered a significant downturn in its income, because it doesn't just print for us, it prints for people in the tourism and hospitality industry as well. And we'd accepted some JobKeeper payments. We had the absolute legal right to that. We had no questions, we're allowed to accept it. We did make the decision we weren't going to pay bonuses to anybody whose performance relied on that. But we decided that it was the right thing to do to hand that money back to the government. Of our own volition, we weren't forced to. We made that decision. And it's one of those really clarifying moments that you remember in your career as to where a business has done the right thing at cost. 792,000 is not nothing. And indeed, we were eligible for more money in the following year, which we'd also determined not to accept. And I can tell you that the value of making that values-based decision has just been incredibly powerful for us as a business. It's one of those things everyone can return to and highlight as one of those values-driven approaches. I mentioned before, we had to not just say, but we actually had to do. We had to live up to these things. And zero contact methods of delivery were really crucial, and a great example of how we did that. And we're pleased that we were able to steal with pride from some of our colleagues in China when we first saw how that was being done, modify it for the Australian context, and to roll that into other markets. And we were able to turn on zero contact delivery in every market. But we had to explain to people that the food they were getting was safe. Previously that was taken for granted, that of course it's safe because customers buy from us and we're a big company, of course it's safe. But we had to show people the kind of extra steps that we'd taken in. And I just want to give you a quick example from one of our international markets from France, where we had shown and how we'd shown that. And we rolled this similar messaging out, but in its own uniquely way in each different market.
La majorité de nos magasins sont ouverts. Nos procédures opérationnelles ont été renforcées pour une sécurité optimale. Nous appliquons des mesures d'hygiène rigoureuses à toutes les étapes de la préparation et nous ne touchons pas à la pizza une fois sortie du four. Nous livrons votre commande sans contact. Afin de n'avoir aucun contact physique entre vous et notre livreur, vous pouvez donc toujours déguster nos délicieuses pizzas tout en restant chez vous. Commandez maintenant sur dominos.fr.
Domino's.
So this then brings me back to different communications formats, because we rolled that out with a video where team members explained it in Australia and Japan. We rolled it out with a cartoon version in France and other parts of Europe, all tailored for their individual market. And then what you can see on the screen here is some of the other different things that we were doing to communicate to our different audiences. On the left-hand side is our Chief Marketing Officer for Japan, Todd Riley. He's an ex-Brisbane boy. And we wanted to explain to our shareholders how we were navigating throughout COVID, how we were winning the trust of customers, and how we were intending to keep as many of those customers as we could when the pandemic goes away, whenever that happens to be. I highlight Todd here because on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see it's slightly blurred. He was actually filming that in his bedroom, filming it with an iPhone set up on a cardboard box. That entire investor day was done with iPhones, with PowerPoint, that we then pieced together with a videographer person, a video editor in Brisbane, just taking these videos that people had filmed on their iPhones coming back to them. Now, I don't like to use share price as a proxy for success, because when the share price goes down, that means I'm a failure. But I will note, however, that our share price went up 10% after releasing that Investor Day series of videos. And what that says to me is that people don't care the fact that I'm delivering one message via a cartoon, another message filmed on an iPhone that's propped up on a cardboard box in somebody's bedroom, or indeed on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see yesterday we hosted Norman Swan for an internal chat where we got him to speak to our team members and explain to them about vaccinations, about why it is actually a rush, to quote ScoMo, that we actually are in a race after all. And what's been critical to us, what's been so clear, is that it is absolutely the message, not the format, that matters. That has never been clearer than in this time. That people want to hear, they want to see your actions, they want to see your heartfelt communication, and to understand that you really are truly living your values. So, if I boil it down to really what's changed and what remains the same, I had a significant amount of, and I'm still in a little bit of grief about this, a significant amount of international travel that was cancelled due to the COVID. Plans to travel to take investors to go to our international markets in Europe. Typically, I would visit Asia twice a year after our road shows and talk to investors face to face. And now all of it, as everyone on this call is, are doing these things via Zoom. But the takeaway for me is that when you boil it down to it, what actually counts for us as communicators, as a business and both of our industry, comes down to these simple things. So my question to you is this super simple stuff. You know, with your heartfelt communications, how are you showing what you're doing and not just saying it? Who are your pillars of trust? And finally, are you focusing on the method and not the message? Are you putting all of your effort into making things shiny and unique and brilliant and slick? Or are you actually focusing on the message and actually living up to the message that you're trying to communicate? Because I think ultimately what it comes down to is we found that by being resolute and really focusing on these three key issues, that's what's helped us get through. Before I finish, I just want to make sure that I make clear one of the key components, I think, to what's really helped us in terms of communicating behind the scenes, between and internally, to help us navigate throughout this, has been social media. And I say this as somebody who my colleagues have previously pointed out that I famously said, I think it was 2004 or 2007, let's call it that, where I famously said that Facebook was a fad and it'd be dead in 2 years. Now, it appears I was wrong for now, although maybe I will be right at some point. And yet, in a subsequent role at Queensland Rail, I was actually put in charge of social media as an enormous skeptic of this. But I've now been working in crisis communications for more than a decade. And social media is the biggest advantage to communicating during a crisis that it's the biggest change, I think, in the communication space in all of this time as a tool, because the ability to push out a message within minutes of something happening, the ability for us to have live chat, the ability for us to, when we have a COVID positive case or close contact within Australia, the ability for us to set up a targeted chat group for the half a dozen people who are going to be crucial to managing that response, to check off that people are actually meeting their responsibilities during that time. The ability to go and speak directly to customers and narrowcast around media is just such an extraordinary change for us as communicators, that I think it's sometimes easy for those who've grown up in this environment, who've always had it at their fingertips, it's easy to forget. But despite that ease and despite that seismic shift in our industry, which has never become clearer than in COVID, it is still comes down to that super simple stuff, that heartfelt communications, because any of these tools are just that, tools without having the right message. And that's become crystal clear for us. So I don't want to take up more time with presenting. I would much rather answer questions. And I'll bring you back to that.
Well, thank you so much, Nathan. There was, yeah, wow. I've got lots of questions, but the first one that came into my mind from what you've just spoken about is you've given some really great examples of the pillars of trust at Domino's throughout the whole pandemic. But was there anything that was really, really simple, easy, potentially fast that you did during the pandemic that would be a really great tip that perhaps we could all learn something from? Was there anything, and I know you spoke about, doing the videos from home and then sort of, using a bit of clever editing to do those, but have there been even any platforms or apps or cool things that you've really landed on?
So I'll take that in two parts. The first and simplest thing to do is that letter to parents. Now, I'm sure a whole bunch of people are saying, yeah, that doesn't apply to me because of parents. But the power in writing to family members is just amazing. And I say this as everyone on this group, I'm sure, does long hours. The nature of comms. I've moved into now exclusively focusing on investor relations. And for my sins, the reason I'm speaking about this tonight is for my sins, our head of communications was on maternity leave as we entered into a pandemic. Which I'm still blaming her for. So at the time of this happening, I was looking after ESG, investor relations, and communications, and I also set up the crisis comms structure at Domino's. I didn't sleep for months. And I say all of that because one of the most amazing things that our organization does is that we do retreats for different levels of management. And so our CEO takes away the leadership team, and I get to go to that. And we take spouses. And when you walk into the hotel room, there is a bouquet of flowers with a letter from the CEO addressed to my wife. And it is one of the most powerful pieces of communication. We do it once a year. It's coming now, and yet it still means a massive amount. That it's a letter to my wife that says, Kerry, I know how much we take Nathan's time throughout the year, and I know how much that impacts on your family, but I just want you to know that we appreciate it. And then it says something nice about me. Here's what we really appreciate about Nathan contributing to the company, and I just wanted to say thank you to you, and this is a little thanks to you and to Joseph and Sarah and Emily. And it every year from every spouse gets tears. And so while we are doing something particularly for parents, how often as communicators, have you ever written to the spouses and the children of your team members saying, you know what, we've been going through a massive amount over the past 3 to 6 months. And I know your dad or your mom, or your brother has been doing a whole bunch of extra work, but we really appreciate it. And here's, a ticket to the movies. Here's a voucher for Uber Eats or for Domino's. Here is something that I'm going to do, some little heartfelt gesture for you. I mean, I just think that is just not done enough. And it's the quickest thing to do, And it is something we are going to do forever from now on. It's just incredibly powerful. In terms of apps and platforms and those kind of things, I mean, I've used Noggin at Queensland Rail. We used another one at Virgin, which I literally almost threw my phone out the window, where you can, broadcast this chat to everybody in a crisis. So my phone, when I was at Virgin, would literally come up, it'd be like beep, 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 and it came up with a screen on your phone. You had to press dismiss, you know, and they're expensive, those platforms, and they have a very clear delineation of, you know, if this person doesn't answer within, you know, 90 seconds, it then cascades to this person and this person and this person and this person, right? Fantastic, amazing, super expensive. The fact that Workplace, which is Facebook, have essentially usurped that product for free is absolutely extraordinary. So we have, I said, you know, the 50-person chat. We then have a 20-person or 30-person chat for then the actual doers underneath that. We will then set up a 6-person chat for people to action a particular thing, whether it's a case that's happened to affect one of our particular stores in the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast or somewhere in Sydney. You can share documents within it. You can set a notification that it sets off something on their phone. You can ring everybody or set up a video chat within seconds from doing that. I mean, like these other products, and I'm telling you, like expensive, tens and tens of thousands of dollars, and the ability to simply be able to set up a targeted crisis response team within 90 seconds for something is the most extraordinary thing I've seen. And I hate Facebook. Like I hate it. And yet they have absolutely nailed that, the ability for us to do that. So as I said, we have, like I got on the global leadership team meeting. We have a weekly meeting tonight. And one of our team embarrassed himself because he said, guys, I've heard that we've gone into lockdown in Victoria. And every other member of the global leadership team was like, have you not been keeping up with the rolling press conferences this afternoon? Because we just read that from Nathan's chat this afternoon. And he was like, oh, well, yeah, I haven't got to it yet. Everyone has seen these things. So you can see them. You can literally see as chats go out, you can see the bubbles of who's seeing these things. And then we will say, right, guys, I need you all to, you know, we're going to do zero contact delivery. We're going to change the marketing. We're going to change the hours. We're going to turn off cash. We're going to turn on FBOS. We're going to do blah, 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 blah. Please give me a thumbs up to recognize that you've done your actions. And you just see that like bubbles come up. There's no, like, we don't even bother with the phones function or the video chat function. We just use like straight chat and thumbs up. And I can tell, you know, Alicia has given that a thumbs up at 10:28 a.m. Like there's my accountability right there. It's just absolutely extraordinary in the way in which you use that. So I know it's like, I'd love to be able to give you a super special, you know, one that has worked amazingly well. And so I'll go back to another product which everyone is using right now. But I used to spend $5,000 twice a year to run our investor relations calls. So I got a company in, amazing, the West, they're an offshoot of NASDAQ, and NASDAQ are an amazing partner of ours. West were, as I said, an offshoot, amazing partner, did a terrific job. And then I was like, guys, I just paid like for an annual Zoom license, a professional Zoom license, and I'm now doing this all via webinar, like SOZ. And we've now switched to Zoom for all of our investor relations webcasts. It does everything we previously did and more. And I save now $10,000 a year by shifting to it. You know, I can do all of this, breakout rooms, I can run polls, I can run Q&A sessions. It's just the most extraordinarily powerful change to the way we do things. And that all sounds really fancy, but let me tell you, it then comes down to boiling down to, once again, the message. You know, like it's about the story you're telling. These are just tools to get us there. My last exciting tool, I won't say that, that doesn't sound fair at all. My last exciting sort of, I've got no other word for tool, I'm sorry, it's late at night, is I was speaking to somebody, another listed company in Brisbane, and they said, I've just hired my first investor relations person, because like me, single person department. Just hired my first person. And I'm like, who did you hire? And they said, well, I hired an analyst. They've come from an investment bank. And like, I'm really excited. They're going to help me work on the market presentation pack. And I was like, that's amazing. And I said, I'm just hiring my first person as well. And they said, who are you hiring? And I said, well, 80% of our stores over the next 10 years are going to open offshore. And my investors cannot get there very often, maybe once a year to some parts of our stores. So what I've done is I've hired a 24-year-old video journalist in the Netherlands. And his job is to circle the world, traveling and just interviewing franchisees and doing case studies about the kinds of things we're doing in all of our markets. And this other guy was like, oh, I should have got me one of those. So my question is, every large business in Brisbane and Queensland Rail, we had one, I'm stunned at Rio Tinto we didn't have one, but every large business, my question is, why do you not have a videographer on staff? Like, why not? Like, think about how much you
Absolutely,
pay.
Nathan.
Think about how much you pay for these things, like $5,000, $6,000 for a day. And I say this, and my friends who are in the industry will kill me for this, right? But because they're like, no, like outsource to me. And I'm like, dude, like this guy's wages. And Monique just said the best job in the world. I thought up until this guy started, I had the best job in the company because I love my job. I said, by the way, can you bring forward your start date? And he's like, yeah, no worries. And I'm like, yeah. I need you to start in Paris. And so can you get on a train? I need you to head down to Paris. And so he spent a week in Paris with Bastille Day. And I'm sorry for the language, but I've taught him a new English expression of shoot the shit out of it. Because I'm just like, dude, just come back with so much B-roll that you can't carry it. And that's what he's doing. He is weeks into the job, and he's producing right now an 8-minute video on where franchisees' money goes when they're investing in digital. Like, why do I have to keep paying this digital thing? Well, here's what digital does. Interview with the Europe CEO, B-roll from a store in France, a quick pickup of an interview we've done of the chief digital officer who's here in Australia. I mean, the cost of having your own videographer on board is just extraordinary. So, yeah.
Oh, fabulous examples there, Nathan. You amazing. Right back to the flowers for your wife from the CEO. I mean, we have a saying at where I work around, does it have the goosebump effect? And I think that certainly really did. And you've just provided some really good tips on some great platforms and apps as well. But look, I know that our audience must have lots of questions. So who would like to jump in with a question? Okay, I saw Bosco first, so I'll go to Bosco. Go, Bosco.
I would say, looking into the future, Nathan, what do you think is a blind spot that most professionals sometimes need to pay attention to? Because it's the question someone asked me recently as a strategist, and now I'm asking this to everyone I run into. So what do you think are your blind spots in an unpredictable, unprecedented world? And what might keep you up at night?
Great question. I would go back to this kind of before the unprecedented world. The biggest mistake we made, I think, in our company's history was prior to really having an understanding of our purpose and values. And that was that we let bad people into our business, that we were going through this extraordinary period of growth. And what we thought was that we could bring into our business people who said that they would like our culture and adopt our culture. And we thought we were smarter than our history. And that was an enormous mistake. Our history of 60 years as a brand around the world is that we hire young people and they make pizzas and they deliver pizzas because they love making pizzas, right? Like, we're not curing cancer, okay? And we love pizzas. So, and those people work really hard. It's a meme of managers about, when you first cry in the cold room. At some stage, you're going to get yelled at by a customer. As I said, my son's already had it. Like, have you really worked in fast food if you haven't been abused by an unreasonable customer? Like, that's life, right? And we take those people and they laugh together and they sweat together and they just experience together. And then we give them an opportunity to become a store manager. And then in their early 20s, they have the opportunity to become a franchisee if they choose and if they're good at it. And these are lower middle class people who got no money. They go to the bank. The bank's like, I'm not lending you anything. And we then give them a loan for their first store. And they work their guts out. A friend of mine, in his first month, he lost like 8 kilos as a franchisee. And it's an enormous part of our success. Anyway, so back to your question, Bosco, the mistake we made was we thought we were smarter than our history. Yeah. But our brand's so good. Well, we can bring in these other people who haven't come up through the ranks. We can teach them about what we love and they'll love it too. Didn't happen. These people came in and they thought that our team members were like widgets, just another cost center on the profit and loss line. And so they just mistreated our staff members. They ripped them off. We found them, we booted them out of our business, and it ripped the heart out of our business. And it's still something we are still recovering from. So biggest mistake, biggest blind spot people have is a misunderstanding of what they stand for and why things are the way they are in their business. Because if you understand, I think ultimately where you come from and what makes you great and what you all love about the business, it makes everything else much easier to navigate. Because ultimately, I can't tell you in 2030 what pizzas we'll offer. I can't tell you how we'll deliver them. There'll be a mix of young people. Well, I'd be surprised if we're not using some form of autonomous vehicle by then. I don't know how people are going to order it. Like, are they going to use a watch? And is there going to be a chip implanted in their arm? I've got no idea, right? I don't know that. But what I do know is what we do well is that we make pizza. Pizza's fun, and we don't overcomplicate things, and we offer it at a really great price. So as long as we know what's great, then we can help navigate through any level of uncertainty and complexity that's in the future. Like, who the hell knows whatever all of those challenges are? Don't know. But I know if we stick true to what our purpose and values are, that's going to help navigate through. And I think these things are really great as questions. Being able to ask a colleague, like, is that the right thing to do, is so clarifying. And my question is I've never been in an organization where we've actually distilled that down to values that everyone knows. So yeah, where's everyone's blind spot? Because they don't really understand what makes them who and what they are.
Great answer, Nathan. Great question. Thanks, Bosco. And I saw that before, was it Elise? Oh, yes, Elise, did you have a question?
Hi. Thank you so much for that, Nathan. It was really interesting to hear from your perspective, sort of how you guys have been dealing with COVID. I manage the social and digital media team for Queensland Health, and obviously it's been a really different experience for us, but similar in terms of making sure that, we're talking to the hearts and minds of Queenslanders, particularly during what has been a pretty scary year for a lot of people, our staff included. So, we've been, navigating some pretty new terrain. And obviously social media has been a really, really important tool for us. People are looking for information really quickly, and that's the best way for us to get it out there. We are quite lucky in our team that we have a pretty flat approvals process, but I was just sort of wondering, from your perspective, you were sort of talking about getting information out there really quickly. How do you guys manage that in terms of approvals processes and stuff? Like, is it quite high up the chain, or do you guys have a pretty flat sort of team? And has that been a key part of how you guys have been able to, get information out to your teams and your customers so quickly?
So let me boil that down into two different types of communications. And the first is your kind of standard, proactive. We've seen this good opportunity. We want to publish it because we think it's going to get engagement with our audience. Ultimately, I think there needs to be a frank conversation between the person ultimately responsible for the comms and whoever the bottleneck is above them, that there needs to be a level of trust that you're paying good money for professionals, and there needs to be some guidelines, and there needs to be an acceptance that you need to trust me until I break that trust. Because really, comms person is going to, of whatever level it happens to be, I would imagine, manager, general managers, probably say general manager is, the kind of top level these approvals need to be given at. You're paying a decent coin, right? Like, at some stage, that person needs to understand, I'm not going to do things that are going to cause us trouble. And if it's particularly edgy, it's not going to be in Queensland Health. But if you're looking for something in another organization where I'm like, I'm going to really push the barrier here, then I'm going to come and see you and have a chat first, right? And I think, that has to be a level of trust that you just have to, it's a non-negotiable. Because I remember when we started Queensland Rail, and we were punching out, I got on Twitter and I was just smashing it out, right? So the CEO was like, Nathan, go for it. I trust you. Off you go. And Department of Transport and Main Roads had to get Director General approval for a tweet. Like, it just doesn't work, right? So that's my first one, is you've got to have it that sort of manager GM level. There has to be a frank discussion about, if this is to work, if we're to make this an engaging channel, you have to give me the level of trust, and we have to come up with the guidelines that we all agree on so we know what the roadmap is. But as long as I stick to that rules, I've got approval to go without needing to go above me for authority. Put that aside then and talk about crisis comms. I wrote the Virgin Australia Crisis Communications Plan, and the benchmark, the IATA benchmark, was that if a plane crashes, you can get a communication out, like in the olden days, a media release out within an hour. And we practiced and practiced and practiced. And in the real life example of it, some bogan tried to hijack one of our aircraft going to Bali. We could get it down to, we had something out in 10 minutes. So we could update the website and we could have a tweet pushed out in 10 minutes. And the way in which you've got to get that to get a speedy response in terms of crisis communications is you pre-draft everything. So we literally have, Virgin Australia had, when I left, has pre-drafted communications for earthquake, volcano, hijacking, medical emergency, plane crash, plane gone missing, like everything, right? And there are approval processes all documented into that. And the analogy that I use in that situation is that, think about our pilots, right? So I'm talking to the bosses there and I'm saying, think about our pilots, right? If one of the engines goes out, do you want them to go to the checklist and go through the pre-approved checklist that we've all agreed upon is the correct approach? Or do you want them to workshop it and seek approval? Right. Left engine's out. What do you reckon, Bob? Might want to restart. Yep. What do you think, Jane? Jane, restart? You good with restart? Yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down. What do you reckon? No, you want them to go like boom, straight into everything you've agreed upon. So in the cold light of day, sit down and think about your worst nightmares, your worst, darkest fantasies, and think about what could happen, and think about exactly what you would say. What's the right language what you're going to use? Think about those things and document every single one of them. So we got to a situation where it's called a red alert. If you have a red alert at Virgin Australia, this is, again, ownership has changed, but back in my day, if you had a red alert at Virgin Australia, the on-call communications officer had authority to get approval to punch that communication out. Like, that's an enormous responsibility. But if the on-call communications officer has been told by the emergency management team that one of the aircraft has crashed, then what are they waiting for? Like, who else do they need to sign off on? Oh, by the way, we've all agreed if the worst comes to worst, this is what we're going to say. You've all agreed, just say it, right? So, and I think this is what I mentioned earlier, that often people are looking around in a crisis and they're looking for someone to make a decision. And often it's the comms people are going to do that, because your phone is melting down. And the only thing I can tell you, having been in this situation where, like, I wasn't actually the on-call person when that hijacking happened, or the attempted hijacking happened. I was on leave. But the on-call person's phone was getting called so often, they literally couldn't use it. They couldn't hang up quickly enough to dial anybody else. And so the calls started to fall over to me, where I was getting calls from journo colleagues and friends saying, what's going on? And I was the one who then had to action this, because I was the only one whose phone was working because I was on leave. And so what are you waiting for at that kind of situation? You just got to go ahead and just, and pull the trigger and do it. So now, that means sometimes you're the bad person at parties. I had one of our senior executives at one of these functions saying to my wife, my husband was told, last week that he can't actually fly on the same aircraft as, this other senior executive, because if the plane crashes, we can't afford to lose two people. I mean, imagine if that's your job, having to come up with who that list is. And my wife was like, oh, awkward, because that's Nathan. And often it is going to be you, right? Because you've got to have to work out who can you justify it to and who can you explain it. So yeah, how do you get that through? Clear guidelines is really the summary of that. In crisis times, or just standard engagement, having a very clear conversation, very clear guidelines that you've all agreed on what the roadmap is going to be, and just trust them to go and execute.
That's awesome. Thank you. Just a note, we do have some real spicy memes that we run out quite often if you want to check it out.
I need to go and follow some more. I've got a friend of mine who is I won't give the title, but is the senior comms person in a particular health district. They have their internal newsletters and memes and stuff. I make lots of suggestions and none of them have been approved for them to publish. So I don't know, but I thought my jokes were sufficiently acceptable, but clearly not. So
send them our way. We love it. We love a good spicy meme.
Excellent.
Excellent. Look, I think we've got time for probably one more quick question. Oh, yes, Hannah.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about how you gauge your stakeholders, and that could be, your customers or internal stakeholders, how you gauge their preference for communication channel.
Well, okay. So the first thing is we ask. So for customers, we do what's called a media mix model. So we engage external experts to essentially work out for us what is the sciences will be on me, but they're working out essentially redemptions of different marketing codes and different quantitative and qualitative analysis to work out where is the best return on investment, depending on where we spend it, you know, versus SMS, print in the letterbox, which amazingly still has a really good response from customers, social media, and paid it, and so on. With investors, for example, internal stakeholders, we ask. And obviously we're checking engagement, you know, like what kind of, you know, how many views we're getting on a particular post and so on. But, you know, literally asking them, you know, where do you get your info? Where do you like to get your info from? And then testing that against, you know, what the quantitative analysis is showing you in terms of clicks and so on.
I think we are almost at about time. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Nathan for tonight. I feel as if I've got so much Googling to do tonight after this session to look into all of the great insights that you've shared. Look, we really appreciate you joining us tonight, Nathan. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Virtual round of applause from everyone, and thank you very much to everyone for joining us tonight. Look, we had hoped to be in person for this event, but obviously that wasn't to be. But I think this has been pretty good, to be honest. So I did just want to also give a couple of little reminders to people around. We do have our annual Iabc Queensland survey that's gone out. I know Nathan was just mentioning about, you know, asking your audience, and that's exactly what we'd like to do with all of you. So if you can, please, it only takes a couple of minutes to complete, but it really informs, you know, the choices we make around the events and programs that we deliver through to you in our community. Apart from that, I think, Rianne, am I providing any other reminders before I close off for tonight?
No, that was it. I have popped a SurveyMonkey link into the chat. If you get 1 minute, please tell us what you think of tonight's event. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks everyone for coming.
You just need to pick someone who's going to get a voucher as well. You can do that later.
Oh, of course, Nathan.
Why don't you do it now?
Oh, no, I'm not. No. With great power comes way too much responsibility. Now I'm going to leave it to you guys to choose, and I'll arrange the voucher. You do the vote.
Well, I think it has to be one of the question askers. So it's got to be, it can't be Bosco because he's one of our board members. So sorry, Bosco, and you already ordered a pizza, so you've had yours anyway tonight. So I think we can safely count you out. And sorry, so who asked question? Elise and Hannah. Did we have any other questions tonight? So Nathan, I'm sorry, it's a coin flip. Who are you going to pick, Elise or Hannah?
I think there's a lot of votes for Elise now. So and now I've got both. Nice. Let's do both. I'll do that.
I was wondering about that, Nathan. Good on you, both. Woohoo.
Doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. How's that?
Oh, look at that. Living as values right there. So Elise and Hannah, if you can, please just click through in the probably to the Iabc Queensland inbox, just the best contact details for you. That would be fantastic. Thank you very much, Nathan. Really appreciate it tonight. And thanks very much to everyone. That's the close of our event for tonight.
Thanks all.
Thanks everyone.